Hi, our guest today is John Erickson, who's a candidate for the Board of Selectmen seat available in the April 3rd town election. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure being here.
I feel like we're repeating last year.
Yeah, in many ways we are.
Okay, that's obviously the first question. You ran for selectman last year. I'd say you almost won. You did very well.
I'm very proud of the support that I got last year. Obviously disappointed with the end result, but I'm proud of my campaign, and again, I appreciate all the support I got last year. And it was a close election for a first-year candidate.
So since you're running against a different opponent this year, could I gather you're running for the seat and not against the person currently holding it? Absolutely.
I'm running for the seat, and I'm running, basically for the same reasons that I ran for the seat last year. And that's a little bit of a complex explanation, but...
Okay, well, what are could you simplify? Could you give me like 2 or 3 reasons why you're running?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can simplify it because it's really a complex dynamic. So I can get into it now, or we can drive there later. There's not a quick answer.
Okay. What do you tell people when they say, you knock on a door and somebody says, why are you running?
Well, I'm running because I see a need, first and foremost. I think the leadership in this town seriously lacks diversity of opinion. I think that's obvious to many people. I think it's something that you can come to a conclusion if you just look at the votes for the last 2.5 years. But it's also about what I have to offer to the town of Milford. And that's where you have to go back to sort of the beginning of my story with public service.
Okay. You ran successfully for school committee. You're finishing out a 3-year term, and you're not running for that again. Instead of your sights set on selectmen. So what is it about the seat besides diversity of opinion that makes you want to run for it?
Well, it's really about what one has to offer with public service. My public service began in 2004, as you well know, yes, in the Department of Inspections as a part-time basis, and then continued with a full-time appointment back in 2011. So there was 14 years of public service as a compensated public safety official, and in 2014.
And you are still the assistant building inspector.
No, I'm not.
I'm sorry, wiring inspector.
Just assistant wiring inspector, which is where I started in 2003. Yes. But when you go back to 2014, I saw an opportunity to contribute to the Milford School Committee. That was my first venture into elected service. Again, as you well know, that was unsuccessful. It was a very close race. And I came back in 2015, and that was a very successful campaign.
Top vote getter.
Yes.
Almost.
Well.
You were until one precinct got recounted, I think.
It was a tie until the recount, I believe. But yeah, very, very strong showing. And I think people got to know
who you are,
who I am, and what I stand for. And then again, through being immersed in town government, both as an elected and an appointed position, I think I really got to know town government from the inside out. And in the past few years, I really saw a decline in the leadership in the town of Milford. I see a lot of decisions that are suspect in many ways, and I look at what I've learned, the experience I've gained, the tough decisions I've been involved with and as a part of, again, through the last 14 years, and I think I have a lot to offer that will represent the entire whole of this community, not sort of individual groups or interests.
Okay. Are you advocating return to the days when there was Dino DeBartolomeus and Brian Murray on one side and Bill Buckley on the other, and it was kind of, when they disagreed, it basically got a little nasty? Or are you just saying there should be more discussion as opposed to, move second unanimous?
So, last part first, absolutely needs to be more discussion. There's been, as you just indicated, a lot of votes with no discussion, little to no discussion, and a number of those votes have been very controversial, at least to some members of this community.
Oh, which one? No, could you pick one?
If I pick one, eventually we're going to drive down into names. You're a journalist. Why don't you pick one and ask me about it?
There was a longtime member of the Youth Commission, not reappointed. He actually went in and asked to be reappointed, and there was never a second to Selectman Walsh's motion.
I mean, that's a great metaphor to what is in place with this current leadership. So, talking about the Youth Commission, talking about a board that a longtime member expressed no interest of not continuing to serve and was not reappointed. Then came back and asked why,
and wasn't given a reason.
And still expressed interest to be reappointed.
And in fact, that particular board, since it can have up to 20 members, it's not a question of there's only 2 vacancies and we're putting these 2 people.
And that's where I was going with this. So you're not picking this individual or somebody else. You're saying that this individual, and I think we all know who this is,
Yes.
longtime teacher, coach, mentor of mine, long time ago, somebody I have the utmost respect for. You're saying that the town of Milford and the Youth Commission is better off without his service than with his service? That just doesn't hold water with me.
I don't know. Looking at it objectively, I saw one selectman who, as a member of the Youth Commission, served with the gentleman and clearly wanted him on the commission. I saw another longer-term selectman who said, I don't care what your argument is, I'm not voting for the guy, period. And then you had the chairman come in and cast the deciding vote.
Deciding vote, although it never came to vote, right? Because it never got a second.
That's correct, it never got a second.
So again, without explanation.
However, let's also point out, though, that the newest selectman who served with this person on the Youth Commission cast part of a unanimous vote not to reappoint him on that committee.
Yes, he did, and I can't answer why he did that.
Right.
But clearly he saw.
But obviously realized.
An error in
Yes.
in his approach or his vote.
Yes, because it came back on
and
not
tried
one,
to
not
resolve
2,
that.
but 3 meetings to try to get it reappointed.
And that's not new to Milford, right? We've had selectmen
Right.
many years ago that have made controversial decisions and then realized maybe an error in their thinking and
Right.
came back and resolved it. So again,
Well,
what we don't have is we have this.
But regardless of
controversial vote,
regardless of the outcome,
we have
of the
no
com-
explanation.
Right, that was what I was going to ask. Regardless of the outcome, you feel there should at least have been an explanation.
I think there absolutely should have been an explanation, and I think if we drive down to 5 or 10 controversial votes, they've been, again, controversial in many people's eyes, without explanation and without discussion, which is, I guess it's profound parallel thinking that you can make a controversial vote without and come to that conclusion without discussion in a 3-member board, Kevin, because I'm going to go on and say, when you're on a 7-member board, you can certainly.
I was going to say, you can't honestly tell me that with a 7-member school committee board, you haven't had a discussion whether initiated by you or another member, or you just bump into somebody about one of the issues coming up.
You absolutely have those conversations on a 7-member board,
Right.
and that's why the discussion
Whereas
of
it
a
was a
board.
3-member board, though, 2 members discussing it is technically an illegal meeting.
It absolutely is. So with a 7-member board that I'm part of on the school committee, I can bounce my thoughts off another member, certainly not the majority of the membership, because that would be a violation. But if 2 members hit it off and they want to bounce some ideas off each other, it's perfectly legal, it's perfectly encouraged,
Okay.
and it's a reason why you would probably have less discussion on a controversial topic at a 7-member meeting than you would at a 3.
So you're not buying what they say is we're just like-minded.
Well, I'm buying that they're like-minded,
Right.
but I'm not buying that that's the entirety of it.
But I've seen the majority of the current board in social settings, where even if they do talk, it has nothing to do with matters before the board. It's about family or about kids.
I'm sure that's a majority of their conversation is not about anything that comes with the board. I mean, that's what, that's the nature, sure.
Right. Okay. So there's an example. Do you think that's affecting appointments to the town?
Do I think it's affecting appointments to the town? Absolutely. I mean, if you look at some appointments, and if you really want to look at some of the brief dialogue that's been given, you tell me if you think it affects it, because I'll give you some of the things that have been said. Not just a friend and a neighbor, but a supporter, a classmate, a student.
Oh, yeah, they're actually identified by board members and saying, I'm not going to vote against so-and-so because she's my neighbor.
Or this is why I support this individual.
Right.
And I'm all for, if you know somebody personally, and you know those qualities stand for a lot, but when it's a friend, a neighbor, somebody I've known since kindergarten, those, there's just too many of them in most of the recent appointments. You know, there was another comment by one board member, it helps when you know the family. And you're at all these meetings, so you know, again, I don't want to talk about...
Even the ones that are supposedly held at midnight and...
Well, you know, I've never made that accusation.
I know, but...
or allegation, but...
that was during the marijuana
These are comments that were made during public meeting for controversial appointments, and it's really nothing against any of these individuals that have been appointed, not against one, not against all, but it's about the flaw in the approach and the...
Okay, but what about where they took Jerry Moody, the longtime town council, is retiring? You have an independent search committee.
Yeah, that's actually a fresh approach that I don't think the majority of this board has taken before.
And Chairman Kincaid said point blank, he wanted an independent search committee because the job is so important, he wanted to take the politics out of it.
I think that's commendable. I think that's a commendable approach that, you know, hasn't been applied to many of the other positions that they filled, but for whatever his reasons are now...
I agree with you at that. As a journalist, I'll tell you, I have a standard formula for how Milford appoints people, which is you hear 25 people applied, 13 were finalists, we interviewed 10, and here's the 3 for you to consider. And of the 3, 2 of them are abysmal candidates, so they get the person they want.
Yeah, so, you know, you're in tune with what has happened in the past. To put this search committee on, I think...
But I'll also say that goes on in every other town.
Well, it may go on in every town or a number of towns, but it shouldn't. You know, I'm a former appointee. I came with my resume, my credentials, my experience, and I felt that board at that time appointed me because I was the best candidate for the job. And I think if you're doing anything other than that, you're doing a disservice to the residents of Milford.
Well, regarding that, you were the only local finalist, and you were the only one who could answer a question about have you looked at our bylaws and how would you improve them? And the other 2 guys, quite honestly, didn't do their homework.
And they didn't. You know, you don't know why they were going for the job, but I had put 8 years part-time service into this job, and part-time being half my work week, 20 hours a week, 19 hours a week technically. And I had put a lot of my heart and soul into my 8 years under Tony DeLuca, the former building commissioner, and I had a real passion for both the building code, the zoning bylaw, and what was happening in this town. And I think I demonstrated that during the interview. And I was very proud of being appointed. Again, I think it was a result of my hard work, you know, during those past 8 years, and you know, my professional credentials. You know, they raised the bar when, you know, Tony retired, and they rewrote the qualifications.
You think they lowered the bar when you left?
Well, they certainly lowered the bar. I mean, they, you know, they went from, you know, building upon the state minimums for qualifications as a building commissioner to going down to the state minimums. Okay. And you know, there's a number of reasons that could have happened. There's some justification at some points in the cycle for taking that approach.
Well, the current board said they just wanted to promote the assistant to from the local inspector to the commissioner.
Well, I mean, you know, the current commissioner was my assistant. He was only my assistant for a year. He's a very hardworking, trustworthy, and experienced individual. But, you know, they definitely downgraded the qualifications for some reason. And again,
Okay.
you know, when I
Well,
said earlier,
yeah.
we don't want to mention names or individuals. None of my comments are about any of these individuals, whatever has come up
Right.
already in this conversation or whatever does come up. It's about the flaws in the approach that I think this board
That's
has
what I was going
taken.
to try to get back to, the flaws in the approach. What things would you do differently, or what goals do you have if elected?
What would I do
Well,
differently?
you talked about more dialogue.
Well, I think the first thing I would do differently is I would rely on the expertise that we have in the highly qualified professionals in this town, from I mean, basically starting with every department head, from the town administrator to the town council, who's fortunately for him, and it'll be our loss, is moving on to retirement. Finance director, keep going, town planner, every department head without naming them all. I think that's how I thrived, you know, in my years at the town hall.
Right.
We all work together, town engineer, board of health, health agent, town planner, finance director, and these are in different aspects, sewer commissioner, fire department, and fire chief.
So do you think the Board of Selectmen is making decisions in a vacuum then, that things involve a lot of other departments, but they just make a decision?
Oh, absolutely. I think I can honestly say I think that the majority of the Board of Selectmen undermines the department heads in the town of Milford. They don't use them as resources. They don't respect or listen to their opinions if they don't line up with their agendas. And I've been saying that long before I ran for selectman.
Okay.
And saying it, I haven't been saying it, I've been
Yeah.
noticing it. That,
So
not to misspeak.
Do you think now, when the school committee is looking at a new policy, say, I know you have first reading, second reading, almost like Congress, do you think selectmen should sit back and do something like that? Like do a review, come back a month later, look at it again, have some dialogue, and then decide? Or, you know,
Well, that's a policy of the school committee to have the first review and second review, but what I think the selectmen should do, in some senses, is listen to other professionals and consider other options. So I'll give you an example. Last night we had a meeting for the collaborative bargaining with, you know, with the school committee, with
Right.
the teachers union representatives. And, you know, as we're going through the contract items, we put up, you know, an issue, and we look at proposals for solving the issue. And everybody in the room sits back, takes a breath, and listens to what the other side has to say. And I think that's important in any kind of government.
well, you have to
leadership.
listen.
You have to listen. You have to. It's about doing this together, right? Because your first instinct, I imagine, and it's mine, is when an issue is presented, you draw your own conclusion. But in these sessions, you don't blurt it out. You don't argue it. You listen to all the opinions of the other people in the room, and we're talking about. I guess it's a good parallel because these are highly trained professionals. These are professional teachers telling us school
Right.
committee members what some of the issues are. And I guess it's more of a parallel than I realized when I started this conversation. Is I'm not a professional educator, and if I become the next selectman, I'm not town council, I'm not the town engineer, I'm not the town planner, I'm not the finance director. I need to rely on these people for their professional
Okay.
opinions and hold them accountable.
But don't you also need to weigh that opinion in light of all the other things going on in the community?
Oh, by all means.
Especially if it involves, you know, a request for money, you have to weigh that request along with all the other requests for money.
And that's a different question, because what you asked me earlier is what would I do differently? And what I think
Right.
I would do differently is involve department heads, which are, again, highly qualified professionals, more in the process. Yes, now you're getting into decision-making and maybe
Right.
difficult decision-making, and making the right decision doesn't necessarily mean making everyone happy. In fact, in government or in any kind of forum like that, you're never going to make everyone happy.
Right. You're usually, though, only going to hear from the people you've made unhappy.
Oh, of course. I mean, it's you know, it's almost like the umpire. You know, you got a 51% satisfaction rate.
That's true. But I also want to go back to what you said about listening. Do you think the current board doesn't listen enough?
Yes.
All of it?
No.
Okay, let's not get into personalities then. Uh, But obviously, if elected, you'd listen more to people.
I would certainly listen the same way I've listened, my entire life, and what I can point back to the last 14 years about listening with people, yes.
Would you advocate, taking more time to make a decision, or just wanting more discussion? I mean, there's some things that are fairly routine. A guy comes in for a license. All the town department heads say there's no issue with granting them a license. There's nothing in their background. The zoning qualifies. Most of the time they ask, a perfunctory question like, how many years you've been doing this, and there's a vote. That seems very cut and dried.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to make anything
on
more
some things-
more complicated than it needs to be. And, these license renewals, or even a license transfer, of course you want to look at the qualifications and make sure
But
that
if there are no issues, they're fairly routine.
A lot of it is administrative, almost a rubber stamp type of thing. They've met all their
Right.
requirements, and you want to engage them. You want the business to be good for Milford, but that's really not your role. You either approve their license or you don't, and there would have to be a reason not to. So yeah, those should all
But
more or less
on an appointment
expedited.
an appointment to a town job, if there's 25 people applying, you'd like a little more discussion and feedback on people.
Oh, absolutely. If you're talking an appointment, if you're talking a salary or a compensated appointment, that's something that can affect the town for the next 20 to 30 years. I don't think there's any reason to rush an appointment like that. And I think it's something that, we keep hearing about the process that we have in the past, and the process seems to have changed. I'd like to see a more concentrated and official process across the board, because and those would change from the level of position, but you've seen it in the last 2 or 3 years.
But I've also seen appointments like the new town accountant, where two of the three candidates were very strong that were interviewed. One of them kept talking about the settlements he was getting from where he was leaving, so you kind of go, what's going on there? But you had 2 of the 3 people the selectmen interviewed were fairly strong candidates, 2 of whom lived in Milford, and they picked one of them who I actually initially scratched my head at, but has turned out to be a pretty good hire.
Yeah, from the feedback I've gotten, it's been a very strong
because
hire.
he didn't have a municipal background, had a corporate background, but turns out to be a really good hire because he's learning the municipal, but has, is 25, 30 years of experience as an accountant.
Well, so that's something you have to weigh. You have somebody that has a good, strong core foundation in something where the skills are easily translated and transferable. It seems like that was a good decision from, I'm not an accountant, but, that makes sense. But I'm digressing back into the processes that have changed from bring us a recommendation, bring us two
recommend
candidates.
We recommend you pick this candidate and then
bring
pick
them
someone
and
else
rank
on the
them.
list.
Bring them and don't rank them. There's been a number of them.
Well, as I told you candidly, I believe those are designed to give them the candidate they want to appoint.
Candidly, I agree 100%. The history is there in the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, that's why quite honestly, the town accountant's appointment surprised the heck out of me, especially one of the selectmen said about one of the other candidates, I went to high school with her. The minute that was said, I figured, whoop, she's got it.
Yeah, you would think. So something must have went wrong along the way there.
But, it's almost, I hate to say this, the Milford way.
Well,
whether you're picking a town administrator or you're picking a clerk in a department, it seems to be the Milford way.
In part, and the appointments we're talking about right now are all qualified candidates.
Right.
So there's a strong argument that, either candidate could do the job and they pick the best one. But there's been some other situations where maybe the best candidate hasn't been picked. And then we can get into sort of not...
Or somebody was on a committee for 15 years and is just replaced for the sake of replacing them.
For the sake of replacement or for an ulterior motive, because, we look at, and again, we're not using names. People know people that are in tune know what's going on.
Right.
We had a member of the zoning board that was recently removed without asking or expressing disinterest.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they were a very valued member of the zoning board.
Well, one of the foremost experts in Massachusetts as an attorney on the zoning bylaw, works for a well-known firm.
In Worcester, and basically, nobody on the zoning board knew why he was not reappointed to that board and assigned to a completely different board.
That he didn't express interest in.
And the explanation I got was that other board needed help.
So again, if you're going to stand on your decisions and you're going to stand up and explain to some of us, use the name and explain why this was in the best interest of the town of Milford. Please do. I'm asking you right here. Explain it, because I want to hear it, and I think the voters need to hear it. And you know what? The residents don't know the experience of any individual member of the zoning board, but when you make such a bold move without explanation, Kevin, you've heard this phrase before. It was used in another controversial meeting. I don't think it passes the smell test.
Yeah, and I'll also tell you candidly, I usually go up to various members of the Board of Selectmen in the days following the meeting and say, why'd you do that? Why'd you take that guy off the zoning board? And I get an answer, and I walk away, and I go, well, that's their answer.
And so it's the zoning board.
But I'm probably the only one asking from a journalistic perspective.
You may be the only one that has a relationship in order to ask.
Well, because I actually cover all those boards. And in the case of the attorney we're talking about, there was a case where you had somebody applying to put a medical marijuana clinic in the Kohl's Plaza. He was the only person on that board who knew a little-known provision of the state marijuana law that said any medical marijuana clinic automatically could receive a retail marijuana license if you allowed retail sales in town, meaning you could have had a retail marijuana sales thing in the Kohl's Plaza. And he pointed that out. No one else on the board knew it. I didn't know it, but he's no longer on the board.
And that's not to say that every member of the zoning board should have his level of knowledge, but the question is...
But it helps to have an attorney on the board.
The question is, why would you remove somebody like that wants to continue to serve? How is that in the best interest of the town of Milford?
The official answer is that other board needed help.
And the unofficial answer is, I guess, open to everyone's individual conclusion.
My honest-to-God opinion is the person they appointed to replace him, they wanted that person on the board.
And they have it.
Yeah, I mean...
It's probably that simple.
I mean, that's the way I look at it. You got to understand, by nature, journalists are suspicious, and I also believe in the thing, I can't remember the Latin phrase now, but it's who benefits. Follow the money and who benefits. So when you take somebody off a board without explanation, it's who's benefiting. When you put somebody on who wasn't the first pick, and you go to the second or the third pick, it's why, who benefits. And that's what I look at.
And those are great questions. I think those
anyway,
are questions.
We are almost out of time, and we've digressed. We got about a minute remaining. John, this is your chance to go right to the public. No questions from me. Just tell them why they should vote for you on April 3rd.
So again, John Erickson running for Selectmen. I think it's my combination of town government experience for 14 years, elected service for the past 2.5, nearly 3 years, my record of voting, my record of decision making, my level of commitment that I've demonstrated to the town of Milford, and my conviction to this cause to make Milford a better place by working together with everyone, collaboration. It's a word I've used a number of times in the past year or so. Mm-hmm. It's a concept I've demonstrated 15 years publicly, that I'm here, to advocate for the best interests for the residents of Milford, and to make decisions that bring us all together and give us the best future going forward with no ulterior motive.